Let's get some thoughts on that tribute to Tony Abbott and his career. Jim Middleton, long-time political correspondent, now advisor at government advisory firm Counsel House. Jim, great to see you. Tony Abbott made some remarks last night which I think were 100% correct in terms of saying the coalition's win this year does portray the rest of their term in office in a different light. Your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly any government that can win 3 elections, well, 1 from opposition and 3 in a row, that's a substantial feat in Australian politics. Tony Abbott, I've got to say, a significant figure in that. Any person who can nearly win an election from opposition in his first term and then do it in his second, that is quite a significant effort indeed. I've got to say about Tony Abbott, a bit like John Howard, didn't agree with everything he ever said, but I've got to say, in my experience with him, going back right to the days when he was John Hewson's press secretary, he was a very fierce advocate for his party's cause. He was always personable, always cheerful, always friendly, never had a cross word with him, even when the party was going through significant adversity. So 25 years in politics didn't end well for Tony Abbott, but nonetheless he deserves to be remembered and remembered well. Also, just one other personal note, Margie, his wife, I do hope that she recovers well from what is always a serious operation for a woman.
Yeah, we absolutely send her our best wishes too. And it's interesting, this contrast between the farewell and, as you say, a deserved tribute to him after a quarter of a century. His success, compared to Shorten's experience, where an unpopular leader, as Weatherill and Emerson pointed out in the review, yes, but Tony Abbott was never, soaring in the popularity stakes either, but he almost won that first election. He did win the next one. So it's quite an interesting contrast on the day that review came out, pointing to the fact that this unpopular leader failed. Well, Tony Abbott showed how to get it done.
He certainly did, how to get from opposition into government. I think he too would agree that he was probably a better opposition leader than he turned out to be Prime Minister. Had that been the case, he would not have been toppled. There's no doubt about that. The 2014 budget was a serious mistake, but turning back the boats was a significant achievement and has helped the coalition right from 2013 through to the last election as well. Yes, unpopular leaders, as Michael Kroger was saying to you a little bit earlier on this morning, unpopular leaders can win elections. It was not simply the case for Labor, and the review that we've just seen tells us nothing we didn't know. It was not simply the fact that Labor had an unpopular leader, as Nikki Sava brutally but accurately put it some weeks ago. What was the cause of Labor's election defeat? Dud leader, dud policies and dud campaign. Now, I think that's fair enough. And the report, the review, does point the finger at the contradictions over Adani. I think also the failure to come up with an explanation about the cost of its climate change policy. Those two things fed into each other. They didn't get their bang for their buck for the big cancer announcement. I think it was $6 or $7 billion. Went up and down in a day and simply got forgotten. It was a very, very bad campaign indeed. But if I can say one thing more, Kieran, it's this: the immediate response from Bill Shorten indicates a bit of a problem for Labor in the years ahead. He plans to be around for 20 years in public life, he says. He was not a very popular leader. And it's also the case, of course, that at the moment at least, Anthony Albanese isn't that popular either. So where does that leave Labor with leadership in the months and years ahead?
Well, yeah, that's true, but Anthony Albanese, you would think, will have the right to take this party through an election. There was only one Labor leader, certainly in my time here. You're interested in your reflections over... yeah, that was Simon Crean, who never got to go to an election. But I can't see that happening with Albanese. He's a very shrewd operator. He not just knows how the parliament works, I think that some of the analysis of his performance is way too premature in saying, oh, he's a dud, you know, and so on. They haven't even got through the immediate aftermath of the election. I think we have to wait a bit longer before we make any judgment along those lines. And some of those internally who might be suggesting it, well, just take a bit of a deep breath, wouldn't you say?
Look, I think I would say this, which is that I don't think that anything Labor does between now and Christmas, short of a catastrophic faux pas, really matters. I don't think the voters are concentrating that much, particularly not after the hyperventilating we saw 100%. Between 2016 and 2019. On the other hand, the government it is going to the mid-year economic review. People will be looking for action there. Interesting to see Finance Minister Matthias Cormann suggesting maybe open to a bit of early fiscal stimulus or bringing the tax cuts forward. But beyond next year's budget, what will be the government's agenda? It's pretty thin on the ground, and we've seen that in the months since the election, most of its actions have been reactions. Reaction, for example, to the drought. It's not been a very proactive agenda. It looks as if it's been responding to criticism and pressure rather than getting out in front. So there may be opportunity for Anthony Albanese beyond the next budget, depending on what the government comes up with. And I agree with you. It's way too early to be suggesting that his time is limited.
And I'll tell you one person that is not underestimating Anthony Albanese, and that's Scott Morrison, because he knows that he's got a pretty good political antenna. The reason he knows it because he's got one as well.
Certainly does, but it's interesting, isn't it, if you look at the problems facing both the government and the coalition, they're being attacked from the flanks. It's one nation is a problem for the coalition. The Greens are a problem and growing one for Labor. But I was interested in what Anthony Albanese has been saying since the election, which it appears to be, and it also appears to be evident in the report that we've just seen published, that they are really now planning to take on the Greens. And the problem there is that the more that Labor moderates its climate policy, the more area there is for the Greens to attack and take votes off Labor. It'll be very interesting to see how in the weeks, months and years ahead Anthony Albanese and his shadow cabinet deal with that conundrum.